Well, good morning and welcome to Green to Grow, Sustainable Practices to Benefit Low-Income Communities. Hopefully you're in the right spot this morning. We've got a great panel with us today to talk through sustainability issues and really as we focus on low-income communities, what can be done to promote issues of sustainability? We know that sustainability issues are important across all geographies, but in low-income areas especially, these issues are paramount. We know that sustainability, kind of thinking about how to balance the meeting of our own needs while not jeopardizing the needs of those in the future, is something that we need to be thinking about consistently, especially in terms of the survival of our low-income community. So our panel this morning is going to be looking at sustainable practices through the lens of low-income communities, but also through the lens of this conference, which is reinventing older communities. We've got three folks with us today. Adrian Benepe, who's with the Trust for Public Land, Richard Kreutzer, who's with the California Department of Public Health, and Sandy Salzman, who is with the new Kensington Community Development Corporation. I'll tell you a little bit more about each of them as they come to speak, but Adrian is going to be first with us today. And Adrian is the Senior Vice President and Director of City Park Development for the Trust for Public Land. His work focuses on the development and management of public spaces, and for 11 years he was Commissioner of the New York City Parks and Recreation. He has focused extensively in his career on public space conservation, design, construction, and operation, city planning, historic preservation, landscape, urban design, a multitude of areas that we're looking forward to learning more about your experience today, Adrian. So with no further ado, Adrian, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. When I was in the previous session, unfortunately, there was a technical glitch and all the images were tinted yellow. And we thought that wouldn't be a great thing if we're talking about green. So luckily, we're able to get a technical fix. I'm going to be talking to you this morning about something that's slightly different from, there's been a lot of talk at this conference about economic development and all the really important ways that you can empower communities through development of small business and things like this. I'm going to be talking about sustainability more from an environmental point of view, from the green point of view, but I think I'll try to make the case, too, that sustainability from an environmental point of view is so tied into all other forms of sustainability, including social and economic sustainability. Thank you. I do work for something called the Trust for Public Land, and the Trust for Public Land is a national, sort of medium-sized national nonprofit organization whose sole mission is the preservation and opening up of land for people. We don't do nature sanctuaries. We don't manage anything. We create public space and we turn it over to mostly public entities, sometimes land trusts. But the whole key is it has to be open to people. And if you look at that map in red, those are the urban counties and cities, and then the other map shows where the Trust for Public Land has offices, and we work in cities across the country. That's my purview. As you know, I think, but it's worth repeating, 83% of Americans live in cities or built up nearby suburbs, and that's a trend that is increasing. So we have to be thinking about how do we make those places able to accommodate increasing populations and stay livable and stay clean and green.
Hey, Adrian, wiggle the...
Okay, there we go. You know, what's this cord? It's very temperamental. Okay, so touch gently. Okay, so we have a fundamental belief that strong communities depend on strong parks. I go a little bit further. I say you can't have a great city without a great park system. And at the Trust for Public Lands, we believe that communities need to play a role, a formative role in the creation of parks and public spaces. So those are some pictures of projects we've been involved with across the country, including at the top left, working in Brooklyn, New York, on the top right in Newark, New Jersey, bottom left in Denver, Colorado, and in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the Rail Yard Park. New Freedom Park in Denver was a really sort of classic example. It's in the middle of a community that is composed almost entirely of immigrants, and not just immigrants, but refugees from war-torn countries, refugees from poverty and from political and religious oppression, coming together in really sort of interesting configurations from many different countries and continents. But we realized very quickly that there are some common languages, even though they do not all speak English, and they don't speak each other's languages. There are some pretty common languages. One of those common languages was food and food production. So we were able to work with them to create a community garden in this sort of empty lot. And then another common language, as we know, as we're heading into the World Cup season, is football, or soccer as we call it here in America. And it's a sport played internationally, so a very crucial part of developing this park was a small synthetic surface playing field. And then, of course, a playground, because all kids need to play. And this is a place that comes to life. And I think that you can look at parks as places to build community, and particularly in cities with large immigrant populations, which defines many cities. The parks become the gathering places, and I would argue in the same way that Central Park was designed specifically to be a democratic space for people to come together and to encourage democracy and interaction. Parks continue to play that role, perhaps in an even more important way in the 21st century. In Los Angeles, as you know, is both a city of Los Angeles, but it's also 81 cities in Los Angeles counties. Some cities do very well when it comes to parks, some do less well. So we get involved with helping communities create small playgrounds and gardens. And a really interesting thing that on your upper left, that slide is a three-headed sort of Mayan dragon from a sort of psychedelic dream created by a local artist. And that's part of another thing which I think is an important part of making places, which is the creative placemaking aspect. In this case, working with a community at this playground in a largely Latino Mexican neighborhood, they said, we don't want traditional play equipment. We want something very different. So we engaged an artist, a Mexican-American artist who had worked at Disney, and boy, did he come up with something very different. A 60-foot-long three-headed serpent that you can go inside of and play on top of and slide down, all covered with mosaics. And, you know, it's that kind of engagement. If you can afford to do it, it's so crucial because you're not just putting in your standard play equipment, you're putting in something that is conceived of and executed in connection and by the community. So how can we tell if you have a good park system? For a long time, it was merely anecdotal. People would say, we have a good park system, we have a bad park system. A few years ago, the Trust for Public Land set out to figure out, is there a way to quantify, can you quantify the quality of a park system? How well does a city do in providing for its citizens by way of parks? And I would argue that, you know, a supply of clean drinking water, absolutely crucial. Transportation, crucial. Health care and housing, absolutely crucial. But I think you can look at cities across the country, and the ones that have good park systems, that are providing the places for recreation, for public health, for fitness, for community building, those are the ones that are the really livable cities. And we came up with a methodology, something we called Park Score. We looked at 5 basic criteria. You know, percentage of parkland in the city, overall acreage, median park size, playgrounds per 10,000 residents, spending per capita, and you add it all up, and we rank the cities. We ranked the 50 largest cities this year. In a few weeks, we'll announce the 60 largest cities and how they rank. And here, for example, this is last year's #1 city. It's the city of Minneapolis. Why is it the #1 city? It's because the most important criteria we look at is how many residents live within a 10-minute walk of a park or playground or a natural area, someplace where you can go. And we thought that's a very crucial indicator. Turns out in the city of Minneapolis, if you look at that map, everything that's dark green is a park or a playground. Everything that's light green, people are living within a 10-minute walk of a park or playground. Everything that's orange is a little bit dicey, and red means, you know, you're definitely in a playground or park-free zone. So Minneapolis does very, very well. Why do they do very well? They spend a lot on parks. They historically invested in parks and park creation and the grand rounds and the chain of lakes. They have an independent park commission. It's an extraordinarily park-friendly city. And not by coincidence, a few weeks after we announced that it was the #1 park city, some health magazine said it's also America's fittest city. Parks and fitness go hand in hand, like a hand in a glove. And you know, one study from the NIH said that 50% of all intense exercise, the vigorous exercise you need to stay fit, takes place in public parks within walking distance of your house. That's an extraordinary statistic. So there's Minneapolis, a great city. There's Fresno, California. Fresno is the last in our park score, and we'll see where it comes out this year. But look at that map. Almost everything is orange or red. And this is a city that didn't plan for parks. It allowed developers to call the shots. It's going to be very hard to fix that. Not impossible, but hard. It will require spending money. It will require doing micro parks and micro playgrounds and fitness zones. You could fix the problem in Fresno, but it's not going to happen easily. It would require amazing determination. But at least they have a data, and you can use this tool and manipulate it. We have this tool we can give cities to. They can say, if we put a park in this spot, how will it affect the 10-minute walk, which again is the crucial indicator. And then you're wondering in your host city, Philadelphia, how do you do? Pretty well. I'd say, I don't remember the exact rankings how it'll come out this year, but Philadelphia will probably be in the top 20, maybe top 15 in cities. It does pretty well in parks. You can see some areas that are in orange and a few in red. That's fixable. That can be done with pocket parks, with fitness zones, with small interventions can be done. So Philadelphia does very well. It's a green city in so many ways. And in particular, because it's a national leader in green stormwater infrastructure, that's an opportunity to create and renovate parks. Speaking of which, here are some not so great parks in Philadelphia, but as luck would have it, these are 4 parks where the Trust for Public Land is working with the Parks and Rec Department, which is a terrific Parks and Rec Department, with the Education Department, or School Board I think they call it here, and with the Water Department. And in each of these places, we're taking these old, tired schoolyards, just like we have in New York City, and turning them from old, tired schoolyards into full-service playgrounds. And they're not just full-service playgrounds, but they're capturing every drop of rainwater that falls in them, and all of the surrounding areas are going into them. And so there's stormwater, part of the stormwater infrastructure. So here's another thing. The city will say, some cities will say, we have no money for parks. We don't have no money for parks. On the other hand, we're in the middle of an EPA consent decree. We're being forced to spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars capturing stormwater to avert having to pay serious fines or violating the Clean Water Act. Well, if you start to stack up your values, you're redoing a playground to make it nice as a community asset. It will increase community values, or real estate values. You're increasing your public health possibilities. You're making a more pleasant environment, and you're capturing stormwater. Suddenly, the money you're spending on a park is so much more of an economic deal than spending it on just an underground storage tank for water. Here in Chicago, one of the themes, some cities will say, well, we have no room for parks. Yes, you do. You have room in your abandoned infrastructure, in your old brownfields, your former transportation corridors. In Chicago, there's an old elevated rail line called the Bloomingdale Trail. It's in the middle of a transformation into something called the 606, a linear park. So many cities have these abandoned rail yards, train lines, shipping areas where industry has left. But these are the remnant spaces that can be turned into parks and, again, improve your community's health. Back in my old hometown, there's an abandoned rail line. This is a continuing theme across the country, a former Long Island Rail line that we'd like to turn into something called the Queensway. And in the top right, you can see what it looks like today. And at the bottom right, a vision from our conceptual master plan being developed for what it could look like, a combination like the High Line, but more active. You'd be able to ride a bicycle on it. The High Line is such a success, you can barely walk on it. It's the most visited park in America on a per-acre basis. This is one where we think it'll form a crucial connection, and it parallels a very busy boulevard, which is the most deadly boulevard in all of Queens. And if we can get people on bicycles on this path, getting to the parks and getting between communities, they won't have to court the boulevard of death nearby. As I mentioned before, you have this great opportunity. There are 750 old American cities with combined sewer systems. Anybody here not know what a combined sewer system is? Do you need a 10-second primer? Raise your hand, it's okay. All right, so you have really 2 kinds of water you have to deal with your sewer system. One is the toilet water and the nasty stuff that comes from toilets and sinks and industry and restaurants. And the other is the stuff that comes from the streets. In most old cities, they all go into the same sewer system. It's called a combined sewer system. In the newer cities in the west and the south, they have separated systems. One for the storm water, one for the dirty water. What happens is whenever it rains in these older cities, the 2 combine into the one system, and instead of getting treated at the sewage treatment plant, they shut off the gates of the sewage treatment plant, and the water all goes out. That really nasty witch's brew goes out into your nearby river or harbor or whatever. You violate the Clean Water Act. The EPA comes along and says, either you clean up your act or you're going to pay heavy fines. So these cities have consent decrees with the EPA, And if you can learn about how to manage this, here we are teaching with our sewer in the suitcase, developed by the Center for Urban Pedagogy in Brooklyn, teaching kids about why it's important to deal with this, to deal with your stormwater. And you teach the kids, and then you can redesign their crappy old schoolyard, a big sheet of asphalt in Brooklyn, let's say. This is what it looks like. Here's PS 261 in Burham Hill, Brooklyn. And this is the classic me and Julio down by the schoolyard. There's the schoolyard. Used usually more for parking teachers' cars than for playing in, but we transformed it into this. And here's your stormwater capture playground. That big synthetic turf field is a big sponge. The trees, the permeable pavers, you can't see it in the corner. There's a community garden. And this is something we're doing in New York and Philadelphia. And again, for $1 million, you do this whole thing. Public money, private money, you're capturing stormwater. It just makes so much sense. There's no reason every city in the country shouldn't be doing this, taking a really bad impermeable asset and turning it into a really good permeable asset. And there's the kids out there. That's a day I just went visiting recently to see the kids out playing in their schoolyard in Brooklyn. Same thing here in Philadelphia. There's the William Dick School, 6 acres of asphalt. 6, count them, 6 acres of asphalt. Really sort of the prototypical urban nightmare. And then you can convert that, make it capture not just the stormwater that falls on it, but falls in the neighborhood. Here's the plan, and the William Dick School will open on June 10th here in Philadelphia. Just a remarkable city in terms of its visionary leadership in green infrastructure. And here's a map showing all of the green infrastructure projects here in Philadelphia. Philadelphia was ahead of many cities on the East Coast, at least. And on the West Coast, Seattle and Portland developed concepts for urban green infrastructure ahead of the other cities. But Philadelphia has really taken a massive lead in terms of how it deals with green infrastructure as a major tool. And it turns out not just to deal with stormwater, but to improve communities and make them better and greener. Even LA, which has a separated sewer system, has a whole different water issue. In the Northeast, we get too much water sometimes, too much rain, urban flooding. In LA, they get drought. And unfortunately, a lot of that water is just going straight into the sewer system. But if you can take these 800 acres of impermeable hot alleys and green them up and make them permeable and put plantings on the edge, you start to address some of this. And this is primarily south central LA, where all these alleys are. And you can address environmental justice issues, you can address urban heat island issues, you can make the neighborhoods, and make these places feel safer, act safer, and be nicer for the community. The old waterfronts in cities, used for commerce for the last 300 years. There's the Bronx River on the left as it looked. Here's the new Bronx River on the right, where an old cement plant has been turned into the concrete plant park. So taking a bad, sort of a negative space and turning it to a positive space. Again, these old industrial sites can be transformed from brownfields into greenfields. Here's nearby Newark, New Jersey. For hundreds of years, people couldn't get down to the Passaic River because it was used for industry, like most urban rivers. We've just finished building a waterfront park in a brownfield next to a Superfund site because we like easy sites. This is not one of our projects, but it's a terrifically interesting project in Brooklyn. The Gowanus Canal is another Superfund site. We're sort of drawn to Superfund sites. It's an old former wetland, then turned into industrial canal, super polluted, and it also suffers not just from the pollution that's buried in its bottom, but also from the stormwater runoff. It's like a lot of canals at a low point, and every time it rains, all that nasty stuff from the streets goes into it. And a local landscape architect has designed something called a sponge park to absorb, you can see that street end is going to, the idea is to have these specially designed permeable planting areas where the stormwater runoff with all of its nasty components gets bio and phytoremediated in the soil before it goes into the water. And in Los Angeles, this rediscovery of urban rivers and cleaning up of urban rivers is going on in Los Angeles, where the river's been largely containerized in giant concrete vaults. It's now being renaturalized, and many organizations are working to try to make the Los Angeles River once again a functioning ecosystem. So those are my thoughts about urban greening, and I'll be happy to take some questions later. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Adrian, for that perspective. I think we're going to have a lot of questions just on some of the teasers that you've thrown at us already that folks I'm sure will want to dig deeper into. So we're going to move from this kind of perspective of looking at a bunch of examples that are taking place across the nation to really zooming in on a couple of examples that are very strategic and targeted towards specific communities or neighborhoods. And so our next speaker is doing just that and brings an interesting perspective to the table, and that's Rick Kreutzer. And Rick is the chief of the Division for Environmental and Occupational Disease Control in the California Department of Public Health. He has spent his time developing a framework for environmental health tracking. He's built better in-state asthma surveillance, and he's helped create the California Environmental Contaminant Biomonitoring Program. He's previously worked with the Strategic Growth Council and the California Natural Resources Agency to work on urban greening issues. So, Rick, we're excited to get this perspective today and to hear more about what's going on in Richmond, California. Rick?
Oh, that was not good, was it? All right, well, thank you, Daniel, and it's a pleasure for me to be here today. I'm very pleased to be kind of preaching to the choir of people who understand the connections between community development and public health, and issues around urban greening are often at the very intersection of those two major themes. And so what I'm going to be talking about, the Richmond, California story, I think has many themes that are quite similar around the country, with older industrial cities that we find not only in Richmond but in the Middle West and on the East Coast that are in some tremendous transformational periods right now. And so how many of you are familiar with the San Francisco Bay Area? So it's nice to know most of you are, but so Richmond sits in the North Bay between San Francisco Bay and the San Pablo Bay, and it is actually divided into 4 little subsectors, which make its development and some of its politics a bit more complicated. I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk off of this slide about the growth of the population and Richmond's development over a little over a century of time. And so in 1905, Richmond was incorporated. It had been part of kind of oil and railroad movements at the time. And it was the western terminus for the Santa Fe Railroad. And after incorporation, it grew modestly, with a few shipyards moving in and basically slow population growth. But with World War II, there was this extraordinary explosion in both population and industrial activity. Those shipyards expanded their activities, and you now had a growth of the population from around 10,000 to almost 100,000 people. And there were dormitories built around these shipyards, small apartment buildings, and small lot houses that were constructed all around the Richmond area. And then the workers who had come from the Middle West and the South were able to get to the shipyards and these assembly plants by way of rail. And so it was actually constructed at a rather kind of pedestrian scale. However, then, after the war, you had those very same assembly plants and shipyards beginning to close down, and a population left there either to out-migrate or to become part of a larger unemployed statistic. And so Richmond went through a period of time after the 50s of making some fairly poor development decisions that aren't different from too many other places across the country. They acquired some additional land outside of the city's center, where they began to develop a number of services. And as they developed those services, the inner city that had grown there from the early 1900s began to deteriorate, and there was a great deal of disinvestment from that urban center. And so at that time, you began to see a lot more crime, a lot higher unemployment rate. People were becoming fairly fed up. I'll just say in the middle of this, there's one kind of interesting side story, which is one of the shipyards had been Kaiser. And Kaiser took a field hospital and turned it into a Kaiser hospital, the first, whereby it would take care of its workers and maintain higher productivity. And that is the beginning of the Kaiser HMO that we know today, and a model for bringing health and work and community development really together in one institution. So it's a great tradition. But so with that disinvestment in the center city of Richmond, then you began to have a political machine that wasn't very responsive, and things really deteriorated where, Richmond became known as one of the most dangerous cities in the country. By 2004, it was the 12th most dangerous. But you also then had the mounting political will for change. And around 2005, the residents of Richmond began to elect a fairly progressive city council, and then a little later on elected a mayor from the Green Party. And so Richmond is currently the largest city in the country with a Green Party mayor. And so with that, this council, the mayor, and the city has begun to assess its assets, its resources, as well as some of its challenges. And so it has existing businesses. One of the biggest is the Richmond refinery, and it has a port. Those things do add to its economic potential, but at the same time, while the global economy is trying to transition away from fossil fuels, having your biggest asset, refinery, also represents a huge challenge for the city. It also has 32 miles of coastline, which is the most coastline of any city on the bay. And that brings with it then tremendous potential for parks, more industrial activity, and other residential and recreational activity. But at the same time, that same asset represents a potential challenge in that as sea levels rise due to climate change, large tracts of Richmond may end up being underwater. So with the City Council back around 2007, Richmond began renewing its general plan to take it up through the year 2030. I don't know how common general planning is across the country. Can people just tell me, in your communities, do you have general plans? Just raise your hand if you do. You know, every incorporated city in California has to have a general plan. And that's a long-range policy document that provides then the vision for a framework for the decision-making about how to use the land. And in California, up until recently, we had a required 7 elements to that general plan. There's going to be new guidance coming out from the state that will increase that number to, I think, around 12 or so elements. And it's developed by the community, and then there is extensive environmental review on all of that general plan. And in Richmond's case, then, there were over 2,000 residents and then non-governmental organizations, other civic organizations, and industries that got involved with the construction of this general plan. The construction of it is essentially then the vision in the community with the various elements. As I mentioned, there are 7 required elements, and then you have the option for other additional elements as well. I was lucky enough to be on an advisory committee that helped develop a community health and wellness element in the Richmond General Plan. And this was one of the first cities in the state that added a health element to its general plan. And so a lot of the work that we did as an advisory committee was first think about what are the characteristics of a healthy city. And so what, therefore, should we be concerned about incorporating into the general plan? And so we came up with these 10 characteristics that I'll just quickly swing around this clock with, for those of you who can't see it. But it includes then access to recreation and open spaces, access to healthy foods, access to medical services, access to public transit and active transportation, access to quality, affordable housing, access to economic opportunity, completeness of neighborhoods, safe neighborhoods and public spaces, environmental quality, green and sustainable development and practices. And so together, we thought that those represented the elements of a healthy community. And so, you know, for today's discussion, I'll just focus a little bit on then the access to recreation and open spaces and a little bit on the green development components of a healthy city. And in California, as you know, not everything is always green. You know, the summer times are usually brown, the winter times are green, and so our open spaces are sometimes yellow. So maybe I should be jiggling this cord to enhance that color scheme. But so Richmond itself is really not that park poor. These pink areas represent a buffer around parks of 1/4 mile. And so you can see how there is a lot of pink representing a lot of parks that, you know, allow for people within 1/4 mile to have access to them. And the most dense area of Richmond actually has access to a fair number of parks. Now, their biggest problem right now is that those parks are often used for drug deals, gang-related activities, other kind of unsavory activities, and therefore these parks are somewhat neglected and in need of a great deal of new attention. I should say that with the development of the general plan, Richmond began to have a certain amount of momentum in a very positive direction. And so building on that vision and that plan, they were able to secure some funds from the Strategic Growth Council that I was part of a team then that was able to grant $100 million across the state for urban greening projects. And Richmond applied for some of those funds to have an urban greening master plan that would be incorporated into its general plan. And that master plan ultimately allowed for doing a tree inventory and setting up plans for expanding out its urban forest, developing urban forest management practices, and, you know, determining what the plant palette would be. And so Richmond now has about 18,000 trees, smaller than I was talking with Adrian about. New York City is looking to hit 1 million trees in the next few years. But those trees alone are responsible for capturing around 9 million gallons a year of water and moving them more slowly into the groundwater. And they remove around 13 million pounds of CO2 a year. And so, you know, paying attention to one's urban forest is a tremendously important thing to do, and something that Richmond now has the benefit of doing while also addressing some of its serious socio and economic problems. They're using this 10-20-30 rule, which is based on family, genus, species notion in order to maintain a fully diversified and healthy urban forest, so that no more than 10% of the urban forest should, should have the same species of tree, no more than 20% should have the same genus, and no more than 30% collectively should have the same family of trees in its urban forest mix. And so basically what Richmond is all about now, moving from that history I talked about of somewhat pedestrian scale, low density housing with different parks, it's moving from this lower density scale to greening that car-centric, lower density scale to make active transportation and recreation more accessible, and then intensifying the population that lives in that area so that you can bring in many different goods and services to create complete neighborhoods, and furthermore, have the basis for creating access to mass transportation, along with maintaining the active transportation options. And so Richmond also has the great bones of a good bicycle infrastructure. And so it does have, again, these pink areas showing a quarter-mile buffer around bicycle trails. But it still has a ways to go. These little red dots throughout represent schools, and those red schools are schools that are not within a quarter mile of a bicycle facility. And their goal is to increase the number of schools with access to bike facilities as well as to different bicycle trails. And ultimately, having a full bicycle network along that coast, connecting the various parks and schools, will be a tremendous benefit to the city of Richmond, and they're well on their way to achieving that. Now, all of this can't be done without, at the same time, being concerned about historical and architectural resources, and having a respect for that history that really represents the city. We have the National Historic Park of Rosie the Riveter, and they pride themselves in putting up signs all over the Bay Area that Richmond is the city with the largest number of Rosie the Riveter museums in the world. And you also have to have a respect for the arts and culture of the community, and this is a community that has tremendous diversity and a really wonderful wealth of art. And so they continue, after having elected good civic leaders, having a great deal of shared political will for the kind of modern and sustainable development of their city. They're kind of enjoying a certain momentum in a positive direction. And another thing that they've done is succeeded in being one of 14 cities in California designated by the California Endowment, a very large foundation, to be one of the Building Healthy Cities in California projects. That's going to bring them millions of dollars over the next 10 years to reinforce the kind of development plans that they have and to become even more inclusive in bringing in a variety of civic partners in each year, achieving different short-term goals for this larger long-term goal. Now, they've still got plenty of challenges. They represent on the order of 13% unemployment in the center of Richmond. They have about 26% of the population still under the poverty level, and they have about 46% of the population that haven't yet achieved high school graduation status. So with those kinds of challenges, they have plenty of work yet to do. But the momentum for Richmond is truly quite exciting and extraordinary. And they, at the same time then, as they are building into this kind of 21st century economy, they're using many, many green and sustainable development practices, bioswales alongside the streets so that you don't have that mixed drainage system Adrian was talking about. You actually let groundwater again return back, or water, I should say, rainwater, return back to the groundwater. And you've got new sustainable energy sources that are becoming a significant part of Richmond's economy, both solar and wind power. And they have themselves tagged on with Marin County to start using community choice energy that increases on an annual basis the amount of renewables and sustainable energy sources that go into the community energy mix. And so, with that story, I think, Richmond is a great example of some opportunities and some successes in a place that has plenty of challenges. And so, I'll be happy to answer any questions later on and look forward to talking with you more about these kinds of issues for different communities around the country. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Rick. I think that brings a fascinating perspective to the conversation to just move us right along. I want to bring a third perspective to the conversation, and that is the role of the local CDC into this dialogue and this conversation. And we're fortunate to have with us today Sandy Salzman, who's the Executive Director of the New Kensington Community Development Corporation. Since Sandy's tenure at New Kensington, she has led it into an organization that assists in real estate development, housing counseling, community organizing, economic development, and land use management. And the land use management program specifically has helped turn her neighborhood into a national model for sustainability, revitalization, community stabilization. So Sandy, we're looking forward to learning from you today about how a community development corporation can be engaged in this kind of work.
I definitely can. So New Kensington is located about 3 miles northeast of where we're at right now. So it's along the Delaware River. And when you saw Adrian slide and it had the orange down by the Delaware River, we're kind of down there. So we were formed in 1985. And for the first 10 years, basically what we did was real estate development and housing counseling and energy assistance. When we had our 10th anniversary, we did a strategic plan, and we really wanted the community to tell us how wonderful we were. We were a neighborhood, a post-industrial neighborhood. There was textile mills in our area. Most of the mills had all closed and gone south before they went overseas. So our neighborhood was in fairly bad shape. And the neighborhood was very honest that what we were doing was really great, but it wasn't what was needed. We had businesses that were leaving and people needed jobs. The education system was horrible. The vacant land in our neighborhood was really, really out of control. And the community wasn't really well organized. So being a CDC and being able to do everything, we tried. But one of the things that we were really good at and we were really lucky with was our land use management program. The city, the Office of Housing and Community Development, was very smart, and they partnered us with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, which, if you don't know the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, they've been around since 1885? 1827, and Bob Grossman is here in the audience, and he was one of our most influential partners. We did a survey and found out that we had 1,100 parcels of vacant land in our neighborhood, which was 1.5 miles long and 1 mile wide. That's a lot of vacant land. Most of it was very small parcels of land, maybe 14 feet wide by 35 feet deep, where a little wooden framed house stood. And some of it was 100 feet wide by 100 feet deep, which is where one of the old textile factories stood. And we had a lot of this land, and all of it was full of trash. People coming into our neighborhood, the families, would send people on these circulous routes to get to their house so they didn't go past the worst of it. And our main thoroughfare, Frankfurt Avenue, was probably the worst. Our commercial development, which Frankfurt Avenue was our commercial corridor at the time, was pretty much defunct. There wasn't very many stores. And so we started cleaning up the vacant land. And when we started, we thought, 3 years we'll get this done, right? I mean, it's not that big a deal. We can get this whole neighborhood done in 3 years. Well, we had one of the longest partnerships with Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. I think that's on record, because we're still going. And, you know, we have made tremendous progress. Almost, I probably would say probably 90% of all that vacant land, something has happened on to date. It's all been pretty much cleaned. The only land that hasn't been touched is land that is fenced in. We do what we call guerrilla gardening, so we trespass on land that somebody else owns. But if it's fenced in, we can't go in there. You know, a lot of land has been developed already because, you know, once you start cleaning up, people can look at the neighborhood differently. And so the neighborhood is starting to be developed. We're one of the hot new neighborhoods in the city of Philadelphia, Fishtown. And then, you know, so that was really important, and it started to encourage the community and people in the neighborhood work together, and we've been able to do a lot. By 2007, as Adrian was talking about the water department and the problem with the EPA, our neighborhood, because it's along the river and because we had already been working on cleaning up the neighborhood, cleaning up the vacant land, putting down grass so that the water, instead of running off, was now starting to seep down into the ground. The water department was looking at ways to not have to build these large culverts and everything to store the water. And so they started working with New Kensington on some water retention basins. And so the water retention basins, we did what we started to call the Big Green Block. And you can see here, there's Shishler Recreation Center, and I don't know how to work the mousy thing. So up at the top is Shishler Recreation Center, and then you come down to Palmer Park and down to Hetzel's, and then Penn Treaty Park is right along the Delaware River. And so those were the areas, those were the big green spaces in our neighborhood. And so we wanted to connect them and make them green. So a lot of water retention basins were built right near all of those sites. But that was good, and that was helpful, and the water department's really happy, but we wanted to do more. And the community now is starting to change. We're getting new people into the community. And so the community wants us to do something with the Shishler Recreation Center. The Shishler Recreation Center is located between Front Street to the west and Frankfurt Avenue to the east. Norris Street to the north, and Palmer Street is the little street at that kind of triangle to the south. Up to the west, where the new school is, that was a lot that was Conrail. Conrail land, it was an old train depot. There used to be a train trestle that came across Trenton Avenue from the Lehigh Viaduct, and it came into the to the depot there, and then they would offload the trains and put them on trucks, and the trucks would travel throughout the neighborhood. That probably went away in the mid-'70s. So for all these years, that land was just wasted land, weed infested. There was a crack village up in there. You know, it was a place that nobody wanted to go to. And we were having an overcrowding problem with the schools and needed a new location for the schools. And we thought that would be the best location. It was right along the Market Frankfurt L, and lots of bus lines were there, so it was easy for transportation for the high school students to get to. And it was a large land so that it could be fixed up and made to look nice. It could have, you know, a ball field and things for the kids. It was right next to a recreation center, so it made sense. But the people in Fishtown, which is on the other side of the wall from where the school was, did not want that school to be built there, because they were afraid that the kids that went to that school were predominantly minorities, and Fishtown is a predominantly white neighborhood. They wanted to keep them out, and they said, no, we're not going to let school go. And we wanted to take down, there's a wall that goes between the recreation center and the school, and we wanted to take down the wall, and the community would not allow us to take down that wall, you know, because on the other side of the school is where the Market Frankfurt L has the Burke Street L station. And it just made sense to take down the wall. People could get across to Frankfurt Avenue instead of having to walk all the way down and around to get into the neighborhood. So as a result, because they didn't want to have to walk all the way down and around, they wouldn't use that L stop. You know, they would use another L stop and take a bus, thereby using more carbon footprint. But you know, so we found out that the school could be built as a matter of right. In the city of Philadelphia, you do not have to go through zoning and have permission of a community to build the school. So the school was able to be built. And after the school was built, the community was really upset that the wall was there. Now they want the wall down. And of course, we don't have any money to take the wall down. So the best we could do is we were able to put a breach in the wall so that people can now walk through the lovely schoolyard and into the recreation center to get to Frankfurt Avenue. And so the Schistler site was a mess. It was horrible. Our kids, here it has this beautiful green field that we designed with the landscape architect from the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. But at that time, the kids were playing on a cinder field. For decades, they played on a cinder field. And for the old-timers, it was a badge of honor, that if you had cinders in your elbows or your knees, you could prove you were a fish towner, right? So they didn't want the cinder field gone. But the new people moving into the neighborhood, they're like, people are parking on the cinder field because they think that's the parking lot, not the ball field. And the parents from the suburbs that are coming in to play our kids, they're forfeiting their games because they're not letting their kids play on a cinder field. They don't need a badge of honor that their kids played in Fishtown, right? So we were able to work with our 2 council people, and that's the other thing. We have council people, council districts, and this area right here actually has 2 council people that butt up against each other, and none of them wanted to take responsibility for Schistler Recreation Center. But we got them to work together, Maria Quinona Sanchez and Darrell Clark, who's the council president. And so they were wonderful with working with us to get the funding and fund the recreation department to put in the new field. We then worked also with the Mural Arts Program and some others. The area to the north, where the Doggy Depot and everything is, that area was wasteland. It also, at some point, was owned by Conrail, although when they sold the land to the school district said that wasn't their land, Conrail saying it's not their land. So it was this no man's land that nobody owns, and we decided, okay, if nobody owns it, we're just doing it, right? We were able to get some grants and clean it up. We made a doggy depot there, and we have a group that takes care of the dog park. There's benches, there's walkways, there's a little tot area. So before, the little kids, the 4- and 5-year-olds, they used to have to play in the corner of the big field when the kids were playing, and that's not a good place for little kids to be playing. They now have their own space. So this here, it just shows you a little bit about what we were dealing with. This here is at the north end that I was telling you that it was a mess. This is good. This here, this looks good as opposed to what it was in the beginning. And now you can see at the bottom where it's, we're starting to put up fences and walkways and define the area. This here is the parking lot for what the recreation center had. It was an area that was a free-for-all. There was no markings, so nobody knew where to park. You just parked wherever. And over a little bit to the, I guess it's your left, there's a batting cage. So the kids are in there practicing batting, and cars are all over the place, right? This area has had now, because it's at the foot of Montgomery Avenue, and it's the low end of this area, there are 2 rain gardens here, and the parking lot has now been defined. And at the bottom, you can see one of the rain gardens. This here is the Conrail land where the school was, where the Crack Village was. So, yeah, this is lovely, right? And again, this picture doesn't do it justice. But the school is now, it's the first LEEDs Platinum high school in the city of Philadelphia. It's amazing. It has a campus. It has large windows, so it's bright and airy. It's the Kensington High School for the Creative and Performing Arts. And so it's just an amazing thing. And it's amazing how the students have taken to ownership of this. They've actually done videos of the school highlighting all of the amazing things that their school has that other schools don't have. They have geothermal heat. They have solar panels on the roof. They have green roofs. They have rain gardens. They have sprung floors for the students that are dancing and mirrored walls. I mean, you know, when they were in the old Kensington High School, they didn't have enough electricity so that the band could practice. You know, the band used to have to practice outside on Frankfurt Avenue. That's how bad it was. This here is the walkway where the benches are, and off to the left you can see the parking lot for Newman Housing. And this is pretty amazing because now there's actually, you can walk from Palmer Street, because before there was no way to walk from there, because that was that Conrail land where the weeds and everything were. This is again another view of it with the trash that's waist deep, and you know, it's now all been cleaned up. There's a sidewalk that you can actually walk on a sidewalk. You know, there's bike paths. This is the cinder field that I was telling you about. So you can see how absolutely lovely that was. But one good thing is we did bottle little bottles of cinders and sold it, you know, to people as part of a fundraiser. You know, so always being creative, right? That's what you have to do. And this here is when we're getting ready to put in the area for the rain gardens, and again, just clearing the land, making it so that it's more stable. This here is the area where the little tots have their play field. They're actually on AstroTurf, which a lot of the mothers are happy about because the rate of asthma in our neighborhood has risen. And so instead of having them play on the grass when they're younger, so their lungs are still developing, having the AstroTurf, we've been told, is a lot more beneficial for them. And this is named for Stan the Cut Man, because there was a famous guy in our neighborhood, and I don't know if any of you know what a cut man is, but so if you're a boxer, you know exactly what a cut man is when your eyes get all puffed. Anyway, he was a very nice man. He had died, and he was really very good with the kids, and he worked with them around the sports and everything. So in order to honor them, the Friends, the Fishtown AC asked us to name this field after him because of his dedication to the children in the neighborhood. And I guess one of the things I didn't talk about is I mentioned our partnership with Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, but for a community development corporation like us, you can't do anything without a million partners. I mean, our partners in this project was the water department, you know, the school district, the mural arts program, the Friends of the Parks, you know, the community residents. We had charrettes where the community residents came in and designed the parks, how this park was going to be laid out. And, you know, there were 3 different designs that they came up with. And then we had to narrow it down to take a piece from Part A and a piece from Part B and came up with the final design. So, you know, we couldn't have done this without all of those people. This used to be our water park for the kids. It was a seal that spit water, and the kids would run under him, and that's how they got wet. Today they actually have a water park that the water is coming up from the ground, and they can run around. And you can't see it here, but because all of this is part of the big green block, and it's all about the movement of the river and how close we are to the river, because this park is only 3 blocks away from the Delaware River. The river is engraved into the water park to just remind people about the water and how close we are to the water and how important water is to, you know, to the neighborhood and to the substances of everybody. And the cool thing about this little water park is along the wall, about 15 feet away is where the recreation center is, there's actually a switch. So if the water goes off, because it's on a timer, the kids all know now to run over and turn it back on. So that's really cool. So some of the outcomes that we've had from doing this big green block has been pretty impressive. 22,000 square feet of green roof was put on the school district. 1,000 gallons, 100 million gallons of water has been captured from all of the different rain gardens. The transit stop, the Burke Street L stop that nobody ever used to use, ridership has increased there by 400%. It's now, back up there with all of the other L stops along the Market Frankfurt L. The area is much more accessible. But I think the biggest thing, besides engaging the residents, is the amount of development that it has spurred around this area. We have probably had between 50 and 70 new houses built in this area. There are the 1,100 parcels of vacant land. We had lots and lots of vacant land. A lot of that is starting to be redeveloped. And Frankfurt Avenue is once again becoming a commercial space. So at the corner, there's a drugstore. There's, a number of new stores in the area. We also have a number of art galleries because we made Frankfurt Avenue into an arts corridor. But we still have a lot of concerns. I mean, one of the things I was asked is, how are you going to keep maintaining this? And so one of the things we're doing is we're really trying to get more users into the park, more volunteer groups. I mentioned the Doggy Depot. That is a group that has, I don't know what that is. Okay. So we have the Fishtown AC, we have, the Doggy Depot people. New Kensington is maintaining the ground in that nowhere land because it's not owned by the city, so that we haven't been able to get the Department of Recreation to take it over. We're hoping someday. Is anybody here from the Department of Recreation? We're hoping someday that they'll forget that it's not their land and they'll just, start taking care of it, and then we won't have to do that. But, so that's our big green block and just one of the little programs that our CDC has done, thanks to a lot of amazing partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. I think you tell a compelling story of what's going on in your neighborhood and how important those issues of sustainability are. I want to have some time just to engage our panelists in a little bit of a conversation and dialogue and give a chance for you to ask some questions as well. I'll open that up for questions from you in just a moment, but maybe just one or two questions that I want to pose at you to kind of kick things off. Sandy, you particularly talked a lot about the role of the community and what's going on, and said that when you started down this pathway, down this task, that the community wasn't very engaged in these efforts. You used the word ownership when talking about the school specifically and how the school has taken ownership of these issues for themselves. I'm curious from you and from others on the panel as well, how does an organization, a group, go about engaging the community in this process and having a conversation about sustainability in a way that leads to ownership from the community to be a part of leading the effort?
Okay, so one of the things that, does this work? Okay, can you all hear me? So what New Kensington did is we formed a number of civic associations. We actually deal in a number of neighborhoods. We have Fishtown, Port Richmond, East Kensington, and then the Greater Kensington neighborhood that we're working in. In Fishtown, they already had a civic association, so we didn't have to do a lot with making a civic association there. But in the other neighborhoods, especially East Kensington, which kind of borders where Schischler is, we formed a civic association because one of the things we recognize is that for a strong neighborhood, you need strong organizations, and those neighborhoods have to have a voice, and they have to have the vision. And if they're not bought in to the vision and have a voice, it's not going to work. I mean, I can want to do something and come up with this amazing idea. But if the community doesn't believe it's their idea and they add their pieces to it, so I may come up with, oh, we're going to fix up Schischler Recreation Center. It's the community that has to come up with what we're going to do there. Because no matter what I think might be good there, it doesn't, who cares? It doesn't amount to a hill of beans, right? It's what the community wants. So you have to get that buy-in from them. And the same with the school. When we were designing this school, we had students be a part of the design. So they met with the architect, they met with the developer, they were a part of it from the beginning. So the first class that went into the Kappa school, they were brought in, and it was their baby, and they have set that standard for the classes that have followed. And one of the things that the school district wanted to do, as I mentioned, we have these wonderful, big, bright windows. They wanted to put metal grates over them, And we said, no, we can't. That would defeat the purpose, And they said, but they're going to get broken. These are going to be expensive windows. And we don't think so. I mean, this was one project, one of the few projects that happened in our neighborhood that during development, nothing got stolen, nothing got damaged. That's how bought in the community was to this project. So why would they break the windows? So we got the students involved, and the students said, no, no, you have to keep them open. So the school district finally agreed that, okay, if 2 windows get broken, we're going to put the grates up. 1 window got broken, but it happened during a storm. It wasn't that somebody broke the window, but it was part of a storm where something blew into the window. So we're still safe, and it's been up for, I guess, 6 years.
Yeah, I would say that community participation is not just a good thing, it's vital to most projects. Both the conception of the project and the sort of ongoing management. And I speak from both 2 hats. One was my hat when I was a New York City Parks Commissioner, was that we tried to cultivate civic participation in the life of every park and playground. So we got to a point where half of the parks had been adopted in some way by a local civic group. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that you get these extra set of eyes and ears who are going to let you know if things aren't going well, but they also get some sweat equity into it. People will plant and prune and paint and help with the overall maintenance of the parks. But they're bought into it. On my other hat at the Trust for Public Land, in terms of these, particularly the schoolyard to playground transformations, we start in the classrooms and we engage the students and the teachers in helping us conceive of the design of it. And so you saw that slide with the sewer in the suitcase. That's sort of lesson A. Here's why we're building this. Here's what's happening on the ground. And then lesson B and C are, okay, what are the elements you'd like to see in your park, and how can those elements be greens? And I would agree with Sandy that the most important part of it, I mean, getting the creative ideas is good, but of course, that's what landscape architects are for too. But you get this buy-in, and you get the sense of ownership, which you cannot purchase that sense of ownership, and it's worth a lot more than those steel grates that make on windows that make schools feel like prisons. Okay. So congratulations on that, and on not getting the steel grates over your windows.
And the only thing I would add to that is that I mentioned at the state level, I was lucky enough to be part of a group that was granting about $100 million to various urban greening projects. And the beauty of that was that you had just scores of Sandy Salzmans who you got to meet, and they were advocating for their community. And you found yourself at the state level then being an enabler of a vision that was coming from local interests. And so it becomes a negotiation, but there's no way that the state can impose some sort of vision that isn't already there in the community. And so the negotiation that we engaged in was that we wanted community to begin to use language that talked not only about sort of the economic benefits of greening, but also the public health benefits. And in order for them to get the money, they had to talk about, what public health partnerships they had established and how this would influence the health of their community. And at the same time, they had the vision about some project that was truly going to enhance this community on a totally different and broader level than that language that I'm talking about. But so without that ownership, and then without the state simply providing that money to a vision that wasn't theirs, it wouldn't have been at all successful.
So I want to build right off of that for a moment and think about the financing for just a second. And I know anybody who's taking really good notes out there and is wanting to do this in your community, that's got to be among the first questions that you're thinking about. And I'm curious to know if you've seen any themes in financing or innovative ways to fund sustainability in the communities you're working with.
It's all, the financing is so key. And the good news is that there is, because of a lot of the federal and local regulatory, the state regulatory people coming down on water pollution issues and air pollution, cities are being compelled to spend money to mitigate that pollution. So we learned in the Parks Department long ago that you had to look for OPM, other people's money. And there's a lot of money out there right now for green infrastructure and for storm water mitigation, increasingly, particularly with coastal cities, for storm surge mitigation in the post-Sandy environment. So there's tremendous opportunities in the cities that were affected by Sandy to use the FEMA dollars as they do the restoration to re-engineer. Secondly, there's a great deal of interest in the funding community, in the big foundations. Trust for Public Land recently got a nice grant from the Surdna Foundation, which is very interested in green infrastructure. The Rockefeller Foundation, very interested in resilient cities. So there's a fair amount, not an inexhaustible amount, of foundation dollars and other corporate dollars specifically looking at resilience and sustainability. And then to the extent that federal money is available, transportation dollars, land and water conservation funds, the more you can start to stack those values and say, we're not just building a park, it's a public health issue, we're improving public health, we're capturing stormwater, we're reducing the urban heat island effect. The federal and state funders like that. They like the fact that you're getting more bang for the buck. So you have to be very creative about not saying, we're building a playground. You say we're building a playground, they say, get at the end of the line because we have serious problems to solve. But if you say we're solving a public health crisis, we're addressing obesity and diabetes, we're addressing climate change, we're addressing stormwater management, we're saving you money, then the scales fall off the eyes of the bureaucrats. I say that in a loving way because I'm a bureaucrat. And we say, okay, well that makes a lot of sense. I remember that the time that the Forest Service came up with this incredible study. The U.S. Forest Service is doing a lot more work in cities now. They did a study through something called Stratum, analyzing the value of street trees to New York City, and basically said for every dollar the city invests in caring for street trees and planting street trees, you get a $5.50 return in terms of real estate values, stormwater capture, pollution mitigation, particulate matter capture, and so on. And I took that to a meeting of our economic development group in City Hall and said, we get a 550% return on street trees. And they're all money men. And they said, yeah, that sounds good. And invested hundreds of millions of dollars in a million tree program. So they saw a return on investment in trees. This is something that Richard was talking about. The trees are incredible pollution fighting machines, and a very modest investment has a big public health return.
Yeah, Rick or Sandy? Yeah.
And for us, we were able to get some funding from the William Penn Foundation, and then we were able to leverage that with the water department, with Parks and Rec, with the school district. So it was a matter of having a little bit of money. DHS had a little bit of money, and we just were able to leverage it to death so that, it was a very expensive project, but, thankfully we had lots of good partners, and the water department right now has lots of money.
I have to also give props to the William Penn Foundation, major funder of a lot of our activities here in Philadelphia. They're an awesome foundation.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd add is I wouldn't try and sell a lot of cinder.
Well, they were
bottles
in
of
bottles,
cinder.
very tight.
All right, well, we'll turn the questions to the audience. If we have questions, there's a microphone right in the middle of the room. Please approach and introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Richard Gray. I'm the mayor of the city of Lancaster. We have a 25-year greening program that we've put into effect, and we've done it through integrated infrastructure. When we do anything with the infrastructure, it's reviewed and looked at from a greening perspective. For example, what you were indicating, we had to redo a dangerous intersection. We got Philadelphia red light money, thank you, from PennDOT. We got NIFWIF money from the federal government. We have capital bond money we used and redid an intersection in a way that really enhanced the entire neighborhood. All our public parks we're redoing and taking anywhere from 750,000 gallons up to 4 million gallons of water out of the stormwater system just by redoing them in a green way. The side benefit of that is that we put up big signs greening the city of Lancaster, greening at work, because recently we instituted a stormwater fee. We're only the second city in Pennsylvania. Philadelphia's done it. Now we've done it. And of course, we're being sued, and everybody else is looking at us to see whether our position is defensible. We think so. That said, other than the stick which we use in our stormwater fee, which says if you do certain greening things on your property, we'll reduce the stormwater fees, which some of them are over $100,000 for big, huge shopping center parking lots. Other than the stick and beating them into it, is there any way that you've engaged the private sector, not the foundations, not the state government or the federal government, because we all know that money's really limited, and it can be used to supplement, but the private sector to step up to the plate and actually begin to invest some money in positive stormwater control and greening?
There are a number of corporations who have voluntarily done this. Of course, compelling them to do it legally is the easiest way. For example, some do it for corporate goodwill. TD Bank recently made a $1 million gift to the New York Restoration Project for the Million Trees Project. Toyota has been a very good funder for environmental causes. And I was recently at a conference, the Wall Street Journal Economics Conference, where corporate CEO after corporate CEO was up there. Most corporations now have they have a sustainability officer and they have a sustainability program. So corporations, Walmart is looking to do greener buildings and greener parking lots. So corporations are being pressured not only by the communities, but from internally, but also by they want their employees to feel proud of their corporation. So you may find that corporations are more sophisticated than you think about having a corporate social responsibility that now extends to sustainability. And most big corporations have a very high-level chief sustainability officer of some kind. So I think we've turned a corner in that regard.
The other thing I've experienced is that with various public utilities around California and our Department of General Services with respect to building state buildings, they have incorporated a whole lot of kind of greening technologies and concepts into those buildings, and they become the showcases and the pilot studies for demonstrating the economic benefit, as well as these other extra benefits Adrian just talked about, that the workforce really loves being in buildings like that. There's a great sense of pride. And, to the degree you can document that increased productivity and satisfaction, it does help sway the direction of the private sector toward more and more sustainable and green development.
Sandy, any thoughts on private sector engagement?
No, I wish I did.
Great. Please.
I'm Marilyn Brown, and I'm an elected official county commissioner in central Ohio in Franklin County, and we have built many buildings recently, all with LEED certified, and it makes a huge difference in productivity and economics. It's cheaper in the long run because we do see a savings in utility costs, maintenance, and everything. But my question is, and I appreciate everything all of you have said, in low-income communities, as you're doing greening efforts, are you looking at the health benefits of community gardening as a way to feed and teach gardening techniques to get fresh produce into the hands of those who don't have groceries that are serving fresh foods? Because for me and for our communities, we're seeing in our lower income communities that issue of not having fresh fruits and vegetables in those low income communities unless we put in those community gardens. So we've got a huge effort at community gardening to teach techniques to kids, adults, and have either the immigrants and our local community residents getting those fresh fruits and vegetables, and our hospitals are major contributors to funding some of these gardens. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because in addition to the runoff that all of these gardens help with, and the rain gardens and everything else, it's food and healthy foods.
So at New Kensington, we've done a number of things. I mean, when we started our land use management program back in '95, our neighborhood was so far removed from greening that people didn't know the difference between an annual and a perennial.
Right.
So we had, for the first 10, 15 years, we did a big education program with PHS to teach people about plants, how to grow, what to do, testing the soil, all of that. Today at our garden center, we do a Farm to Families program, which we do in cooperation with St. Christopher's Hospital for Children. Families can buy a basket of fresh vegetables or fruit, if they just want fruit, for $10 or $15. Now, it's a CSA, but it's done on a weekly basis. Most CSAs are done community-sponsored agriculture. So most of them are done that you buy at the beginning of the year, and you have to put out a large outlay of a couple $100. Ours is done on a weekly basis where you pay for the next week. So if you're going to be going away for 2 weeks, you don't have to worry about paying for the next 2 weeks. You just come in and then pay when you come back. And so that has been really beneficial. And then we have a program in our neighborhood called Greens Grow Farm, which is probably one of the most successful farms in the inner city ever. It's on an old Superfund site that New Kensington owns. And they started out by growing lettuce and tomatoes, and it was done hydroponically. So that was their little thing, but now they're not doing that as much anymore. But they also have a CSA, and they bring in fresh organic fruits and vegetables from farms all around the city of Philadelphia. And then we have a couple of areas where people actually grow in growing beds that the lots are fenced off on some of the lots that we have, and they grow their own fruits and vegetables, and so we're doing a lot of that.
So three thoughts about community gardens. First of all, I'm a big fan. There are over 600 in New York City, 300 of them under the Parks Department jurisdiction. That's a trust for public land. We've always tried to incorporate either community gardens or learning gardens. They're very important. But I think the idea of urban agriculture at a large scale might be somewhat like going down the wrong path, because it ends up being a very expensive, intensive use of vital space, which it might be better used for housing. There's a reason why it's more effective to grow crops in the countryside, because land is a lot cheaper. The other problem you have with community gardens is that many of them are around former housing sites or abandoned lots. You'd be astonished, and I think Richard would agree here, at the levels of lead, arsenic, cadmium, really nasty stuff in the urban soils. So you have to be very careful about growing in raised beds, and otherwise you're growing in a very contaminated place. I think they work best small scale for individual support, for families to grow their own crops or for their neighbors. urban agriculture on a large scale is only going to work in a city where there's large amounts of open space, which generally means a pretty depressed city, a city where people are moving out. And I suspect that in those cases, if you can find uncontaminated land to do large-scale farming, maybe. But I think the most efficacious use of growing things in a garden setting to consume would be small-scale private production, and just be very careful about what you're growing it in.
And every one of these issues, though, does become an opportunity for education. And so I've been so impressed by how certain projects that get funded, they may not fit a really sound economic model like Adrian is suggesting, but they are always opportunities for education of school kids, community members, or what have you. And so I think they often do have some additional benefits beyond this notion of providing calories or nutrition to locals in the community. We also had some experiences where community gardens had kind of membership requirements, and it was exclusive of people who might otherwise benefit from it, and so we wouldn't fund projects like that, and made sure that that the membership to any given community garden was open and accessible to all. And the last thing I'd say is that we had a wonderful project in Oakland called Plowshares, where they had women battered shelters, they had homeless shelters, as well as affordable housing in this area. And Plowshares was both a community farm and nursery. And they sold nursery stock throughout the region, and also had contracts with local restaurants to be providing, these kind of neat greens that now you can get at every, high-end restaurant. And so they had been very successful at really building a fairly sound business model into the way they were bringing their residents together to grow food, both for themselves and for sale, and to grow plants that then were also for sale.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I apologize to the three of you, and I know I had a litany of additional questions as well. So hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation that will continue. I want to thank our panelists for their thoughtful contributions today. And thank our audience as well for your engagement. Your next stop is lunch in the lunch plenary, so we'll look forward to seeing you there.